Across the galaxy, the Predator's pact was feared by all. It was not a government or a council, but a coalition of the most dangerous species from the harshest death worlds in existence. Planets where acid rains, gravity crushed bones, and even plants hunted for prey. These species were born in violence and sharpened by survival, believing no one in the galaxy could match their strength. For centuries, they ruled silently, keeping other civilizations in line through intimidation and sudden shows of power. But their confidence began to crack when a remote exploratory outpost on the galaxy's edge suddenly went dark. At first, the Pact assumed it was a natural disaster until they reviewed the last data burst. Grainy footage from damaged drones showed tall, two-legged beings walking through fire, wielding weapons that tore through steel and monsters alike. More concerning than their strength was their behavior. They moved in perfect formations, communicated silently, and worked together like one mind. No known species had tactics like that, not even the Pact's own elite hunters. When a ship from this unknown world approached a border station, uninvited and unafraid, alarms rang across the Pact's command centers. The visitors identified themselves as Terrans and calmly requested a diplomatic conversation. The station's atmosphere, known to corrode most species' armor, didn't even slow them down. They walked freely in light gear, their faces uncovered, breathing in toxins like it was fresh air. The Council of the Pact was unsettled. Who were these humans? How did they survive such environments without flinching? To find answers, the Pact summoned Commander Threx of the Jagari, one of their most ruthless and cunning warriors. Threx was a veteran of over 100 hunts across death worlds, known for bringing down beasts the size of ships with nothing but instinct and claw. If anyone could uncover the truth and eliminate a rising threat, it was him. He accepted the mission with quiet confidence, his yellow eyes narrowing as he studied the Terran footage. But beneath his calm exterior, something tugged at the edge of his mind, a feeling he hadn't experienced in decades. These Terrans were different. They didn't posture, they didn't threaten, and they didn't retreat. They walked into danger with a strange calm, like they had faced worse and survived. As Threx's ship prepared to make the journey toward this mysterious planet called Earth, he couldn't shake the thought that for the first time in generations, the hunters of the galaxy might have just met something they didn't understand. Something that hunted in silence, not for food or glory, but because it had no other choice. The deeper question remained, were the humans just another brutal species, or something far more dangerous? And if they were not trying to conquer, then why were they coming? When Commander Threx and his scout team first landed on Earth, they expected to find the same savage, chaotic species they had encountered on other death worlds. He anticipated wild, unpredictable creatures, perhaps primitive in nature, easy to control or destroy. Instead, what he found was something that made him question his understanding of warfare and survival itself. Earth, it seemed, was not a world of simple brutality. It was a world that had been shaped by chaos and conflict into something far more dangerous. From the moment Threx's boots touched the planet's surface, he could see that this was no ordinary place. Humans lived everywhere, in frozen tundras where temperatures could freeze bone, in irradiated zones where even air itself could burn, and in deserts where the sun scorched everything it touched. And yet, they thrived. The humans did not run from these environments. They adapted. They turned every harsh challenge into an opportunity to grow stronger. Threx watched, stunned, as human soldiers trained in powered exosuits, their movements smooth and coordinated as they stormed through simulations that tested both endurance and intellect. Nearby, unaugmented scouts moved through dense forests with nothing but their wits and stealth, disappearing into the shadows as if the environment itself were an ally. On the other side of the planet, Threx observed pilots performing high-speed maneuvers in vehicles that defied the very laws of physics. Ships twisted, flipped, and dove in ways that made the Jagari commander's mind reel. It was unlike anything he had ever seen, too precise, too deliberate. He then came across something that unsettled him most of all. A group of humans stood, in front of a massive training structure, laughing and joking as they prepared for a simulated battle. Their leader, a woman with scars across her face, grinned as her team checked their weapons. There was no fear in their eyes, no hesitation, only excitement. They looked forward to the danger, like it was a challenge they couldn't wait to face. Threx had witnessed countless species on dozens of Deathworlds, each more dangerous than the last. But this was something different. The humans didn't just survive in their world, they had mastered it. They turned chaos into strategy and war into something more refined. It was as if they understood conflict on a deeper level than any species Threx had encountered. The realization hit him with the force of a blow. These humans weren't just another violent species. They were engineered by their circumstances, made better by the constant threat of destruction. This was not the way of the Deathworlds he knew. Here, survival was not merely a reaction to danger. It was the driving force of their existence. They didn't hide from peril. They embraced it, refined it, and used it to become stronger. He could feel a ripple of unease, something stirring deep inside him. If these humans were capable of turning chaos into order, what would they do when they truly realized their potential? What would they become once they had perfected the art of war and survival? As the days passed, Threx's unease grew into something darker. He began to understand that these humans weren't merely another species to conquer. They were a force that could challenge the very foundation of the Predator's pact. There was no easy victory here. The report Threx sent back to the pact was short, yet it carried a weight none of the pact's leaders could ignore. His message simply read, potentially catastrophic. In those two words, he conveyed the gravity of what he had discovered. A species that had the power to bring down even the greatest predators in the galaxy. And the worst part, they had barely begun to show their true potential. In a desperate and misguided attempt to reassert their dominance, the Predators' Pact issued a challenge to Earth. They called for a traditional ritual combat match, a practice that had been used for centuries among Deathworlders to settle disputes. The challenge was simple. Earth had to send its finest warrior to fight for the honor of its species. The message was clear. This was not just a test of strength, but a way for the Predators' Pact to demonstrate their superiority and humiliate Earth's unknown species. If the Terrans were truly as dangerous as they seemed, they would have no choice but to answer the call. The humans, confident yet unwilling to provoke unnecessary conflict, agreed. But they didn't send a team of elite soldiers or renowned heroes. No, they sent Captain Elena Rourke, a battle-worn veteran who had lived through wars, survived insurmountable odds, and walked away with scars that told more stories than any medal. Rourke was not the most famous soldier, but she was among the most capable, and her calm demeanor and steel nerves made her an ideal choice for this match. She had no grand speeches or boasting. She was just a soldier, ready to face whatever came her way. Her opponent, however, was nothing short of terrifying. From Gravna Prime, a world where the very atmosphere itself was poisonous and the predators were larger than ships, came a monstrous figure. The creature, known as Draxk, was an 8-limbed brute, its massive arms capable of crushing through steel with a single swipe. Its thick, scaled hide was nearly impenetrable, and its eyes glowed with the hunger of a hunter. The crowd of Deathworlders watched eagerly, certain that Earth would be humiliated before the entire galaxy. Draxk was an experienced fighter, and this would be an easy victory for the Pact, they thought. The arena was a perfect battleground, a massive, open space designed to showcase the strength and skill of its combatants. As the battle began, Draxk charged with a roar that shook the ground, his claws raised to strike with unimaginable force. The air crackled with anticipation. But Elena Rourke didn't flinch. She didn't rush into the fight, trying to overpower the brute. Instead, she watched. She studied Draxk's movements, analyzing every shift in his body, every flicker of muscle, every change in his breathing. She didn't rely on brute force. She knew that would be a mistake. The technology she wore, enhanced combat gear designed for maximum agility and reflexes, gave her the edge. But it wasn't the suit that made the difference. It was her mind. With a calm that would unnerve even the most experienced Deathworlder, she allowed Drax to make the first move. She dodged effortlessly, using her speed to avoid his crushing blows, and then, with precise, calculated strikes, she began to exploit his weaknesses. She targeted the joints in his limbs, the areas where his armor was weakest, and the soft underbelly beneath the tough, scaly hide. As the battle raged on, Drax grew more frustrated, his strikes becoming sloppier, more reckless. Rourke, meanwhile, moved like water, fluid, smooth, and unpredictable. She didn't need strength to win, she needed timing, and that's what she had in abundance. With one final well-placed strike, she drove a pulse knife into the gap between Drax's ribs, a pinpoint move that disabled his vital organs. The giant monster staggered, his limbs going limp as he collapsed to the ground, defeated. The arena fell silent. Rourke stood over her fallen opponent, breathing evenly, her face calm. She had won. Not by strength, but by skill, intelligence, and cold, clinical precision. The audience was stunned into silence. This was not how they expected the fight to go. The Predators Pact had watched countless battles, but never had they seen such a calculated, effective fighter. They had underestimated Earth. What they didn't realize was that Rourke wasn't even Earth's best. She was simply a representative. As the silence stretched on, a slow realization began to spread through the Pact's leaders. Earth had sent a single warrior, and yet they had won. The entire battle was over in moments. The Predators' Pact was humiliated, and worse still, they now understood that they had no idea what kind of power Earth could wield. The question was no longer whether humans could fight. They had just seen what humans were capable of. The question was, how much worse could it get? Feeling increasingly cornered and humiliated by their previous loss, the Predators' Pact made a desperate decision. They would not tolerate this challenge to their authority any longer. With their pride on the line, they assembled their vast fleets and set their sights on Earth, ready to launch a full-scale invasion. The Pact was confident. After all, they had conquered countless worlds, obliterated entire civilizations, and crushed species far more advanced than the humans of Earth. This would be no different. They expected a swift victory. They would descend upon Earth with overwhelming force, and the planet would fall before them. But as their warships entered Earth's orbit, they quickly learned they had miscalculated. The moment the first ship dropped from hyperspace, it was met with a storm of firepower. From the surface, the Terran defense grid, an intricate network of orbital weapons, unleashed devastating kinetic projectiles that tore through the Pacts, ships like paper. The invaders hadn't even begun to land before their fleet began to crumble. Their ships were pelted with high-speed rods of metal, launched from Earth's atmosphere with precision and power that no other species had ever mastered. The Pact's commanders, who had grown accustomed to overwhelming their enemies with sheer force, were now scrambling to avoid destruction, and that was just the beginning. As the Pact's forces attempted to land, they found themselves facing Earth's hidden defenses. The humans, who had already proven their ingenuity in battle, unleashed EMP nets that disabled most of the invading ship's systems. Communications were severed, navigation systems went dark, and many of the ships plummeted uncontrollably toward the ground. But it didn't stop there. From the shadows of Earth's vast landscapes, guerrilla units emerged, striking with uncanny coordination. These units, made up of soldiers, civilians, and anyone else with the will to fight, ambushed the invaders from every direction. Humans had turned every environment into a weapon. Forests, cities, mountains, and even deserts became traps for the Pact forces. Stealth bombers flew through the skies, launching surprise strikes with pinpoint accuracy. It wasn't just the force of the attack that bewildered the invaders. It was how precisely the humans knew how to use their terrain. Every natural feature became an advantage. The rocky cliffs, dense jungles, and urban sprawl were all used to outsmart the superior technology of the Pact's invasion force. Humans didn't just fight back. They learned as they fought. Every tactic, Every movement of the invaders was observed, analyzed, and adapted to. The human forces quickly turned the Pact's own strategies against them. Where the Pact had relied on overwhelming numbers and brute strength, humans turned each weakness into an opportunity. They exploited the invaders' reliance on heavy machinery, ambushing armored units in narrow streets or under dense tree cover where their machines couldn't maneuver. Every engagement was a test, and humans adapted quickly, always staying one step ahead. The invaders, who had thought they were invincible, were now scrambling to maintain control, but the tide was turning against them. Within weeks, the once mighty fleets of the Predators' Pact were shattered. Their soldiers, who had once stood tall and proud on countless worlds, now found themselves overwhelmed by a force that was not bigger, not stronger, but smarter. The surviving Pact commanders were eventually captured, their forces broken and scattered. But what happened next was even more shocking. Instead of being punished or tortured, as most would expect in such a brutal war, the Pact commanders were treated with strategic mercy. They were given food, healed from their wounds, and released. Earth wasn't interested in revenge. They had already won. Before they left, the humans delivered one simple message: don't come back. It wasn't a threat, it was a warning. The message was clear. Earth was not to be underestimated, and any force that came to challenge it would face the same fate. The Predators' Pact, once feared as the apex predators of the galaxy, now knew the truth. They had met something far more dangerous than they could have ever imagined. And this time, there would be no second chances. As the dust settled from Earth's astonishing victory over the Predators' Pact, the galaxy began to change. Species that had once been subjugated or oppressed by the Pact saw an opportunity. The stories of Earth's defiance, of how a single species had stood against the strongest force in the galaxy and won, spread like wildfire across the stars. For the first time, worlds that had been crushed under the boot of the Pact found a glimmer of hope. Some species, emboldened by Earth's success, reached out, eager to form alliances with the humans. They saw them as not just powerful, but inspiring, a species that didn't need to dominate or destroy to be strong. Earth had demonstrated that true power wasn't about subjugating others, it was about standing firm for what was right. Others, more cautious but equally impressed, sought the Terrans' guidance. They asked for advisors, humans who could help them build societies based on the same principles Earth had demonstrated. Yet despite the galaxy's sudden interest in Earth's strength, humanity remained resolute. They weren't looking to conquer or control. Their focus was on something far more profound. They offered knowledge, technology, and trade to those who asked for it, but with one simple clause: there would be no predation, no slavery, and no exploitation of other planets. The message was clear. Earth's strength was in its responsibility. Strength, the humans believed, wasn't about domination. It was about using power for the betterment of all, ensuring that every species could grow without the fear of being crushed under the weight of another's might. The idea began to spread quickly, from Deathworlders who had once been predators themselves to diplomats who had been trained in deceit and manipulation. Species across the stars began to rethink what it meant to be apex. No longer was power measured by how much land or resources you could claim, nor how many civilizations you could destroy. True strength, they realized, was measured by how you cared for the weak, how you stood up for the oppressed, and how you used your abilities to uplift others. It was a slow process, but humanity's philosophy was catching on. It wasn't long before the galaxy began to shift in ways no one had predicted. Former enemies of the Pact began to ally with each other, forming new coalitions based on mutual respect and shared values. Earth's influence grew, not because others feared them, but because they respected what the humans represented. They had become a symbol of something new, a beacon for what could be achieved when strength was tempered with compassion and wisdom. And in the vast, infinite reaches of space, where once the only rule had been the survival of the fittest, new kind of power began to rise. This was a power not born of fear, but of respect, a force that was no longer about taking, but about giving. Humanity, once just another species on the fringe of galactic civilization, had become a cornerstone of a new order. The stars were still dark, still dangerous, but now they held the promise of something greater, a future where strength meant responsibility, and the galaxy was no longer ruled by fear, but by a collective effort to help each other rise. And for the first time in a long time, the galaxy had hope.